Hello everyone. I wanted to do a video on, is the stock market overvalued? We're starting to see some hype, but is it, like, where are we at there? So one of the things that caught my eye is, or a couple things I should say, is the growing increase of IPOs in the United States, as well as talk of SPACs. And that reminded me of a passage from Benjamin Graham's Intelligent Investor about this exact thing. And if you go and study stock market history and IPO history, you can see a pretty, maybe not a correlation, but you can see some signals in a lot of the IPO data. So the higher the IPO number per year, you can see that correlates pretty heavily with like a bust cycle in the S&P 500. And so I wanted to cover that as well as we will look at all the IPOs over the last 25 years. We'll look at high-flying IPOs this year so far, which there are a few. Then we'll look at 2021. And one of the ones that I'm going to share from then is actually not a 2021 IPO, but it went through a huge boom bust cycle. And then the final thing I want to cover is, AI. Is it profitable or is it just hype? And I think, that'll be pretty fun to cover. I have a good example for you. All right, so let's talk about Benjamin Graham a little bit. Widely considered to be one of the greatest investors of all time. He's Warren Buffett's mentor. And, you can read this quick passage. Graham warns investors to avoid purchasing initial public offerings, particularly in bull markets, for two reasons. Usually what happens in IPOs, well, not usually, what happens in IPOs is the people who underwrite the IPOs get a huge commission. So like, as an individual investor, if you haven't purchased these shares privately, but prior to them going public, these shares are not being offered to you in your best interest or at like a bargain price. Now he goes on to talk about the number of IPOs as like a signal for like, if a market is super bullish and overhyped and vice versa. Like, you can also see the opposite, where when there's very little number of IPOs, that can be a signal as like, oh, maybe the market is a little underpriced. It's not always the case, but let's look at some IPO stats. So you can see the number of IPOs in 2000, 397. Now, I found some other stats, which I don't have on the screen, for the 90s, and they were around this level or higher, just basically at around this level for almost all of the 90s. You can see a steep fall off in 2001, which is the dot-com bubble. You see it start to build again until 2008, which is the great financial crisis, where there's like, I think this is the lowest number of IPOs on the chart. Yeah, it is. So, there's a couple reasons for that. Obviously, when a company goes public, they want to do it in a bull market. That's going to be the most beneficial time for them to do it, to generate that cash and that offering. So that's why you typically see that. But it can also indicate, like I said earlier, that you're in a market that's too hot. So if we keep going right here, you can kind of see it's been fairly steady until we get to 2020 and then 2021. Now, I started investing seriously in 2020. And I can tell you from experience in 2021, that was an insanely hot, hyped market. IPOs, I mean, look at that. I think that may be the number, like the highest number of IPOs since 1990, 1,035 in 2021. And that was along with a lot of SPACs, which we'll talk about in a second too. But let's actually, before we do SPACs, let's go and look at some 2021 IPOs. So you can see Coinbase here went public in, it looks like, May 2021. Huge, price. It was super hyped. I remember this IPO, and then you can see it just like completely crashes in summer 2022 all the way until like October 2023, and it's just now getting back to the prices of its IPO era. So this is kind of what I'm trying to get at. It's like, one, this is not financial advice, but I would avoid. You can get really lucky, but you want to avoid purchasing IPOs for the most part, unless they're like in their down cycle and it's an actually good company. And then let's look at NIO. NIO actually wasn't an IPO in 2021, but I think it's a great example because here it is trading at like $8 a share in December 2018. And then in the hype cycle in 2021, it got all the way up into the 50s. Now, I got super lucky. There's only one trade I've ever been successful on. It's when I invested $1,000 in NIO at like somewhere around 10 or 11 bucks and sold it at about 50 for a 5x return. But you can see like it wasn't really a good investment. I just like got lucky, and it's come all the way down to, it's at $3.41 right now. Like it's got nowhere. It's actually gone way down. So let's check out 2025. So far this year you're seeing Circle Internet Group. So if we go to the chart, when we look at the chart here, do year to date. This just came out recently. Started at 31 on June 4th. It's already up to $240. That is a massive increase. Does it deserve that? Probably not. You can see the PE ratio here. 2,400. That's like a, early 2010 Amazon PE ratio, and it's currently 4x more than Palantir. So that's pretty substantial. So big hype cycle right now for Circle Internet Group. Let's look at CoreWeave. This is another one that's been super hype and had a huge run up. So you could see April, about $38 a share. Now it's at 182. They're not profitable at all. Market cap of 88 billion is 6-7x of Hims and Hers, which is insanely profitable compared to this business. So I'm not trying to like lecture or anything. My point is, we are starting to see IPOs heat up and hype cycles heat up. And so you want to be very careful with these stocks. Like I wouldn't be buying any of these. Let's go back to IPOs. So we are heating up. We're at 157 for the year so far. So we're on pace to have the highest number of IPOs since 2021. So about over 300. And maybe we'll see a lot more in the summer. Who knows? So this is something to keep an eye on. This is kind of a signal for me where I'm like, okay, let's start to keep an eye on this. Maybe the market's starting to get to that place where it's overvalued. And right now I just increased my cash a little bit over the last month or so after going almost all in on the market when it crashed to 4,800 due to probably the longest period of poor consumer sentiment ever, like 12 weeks of insanely bad consumer sentiment on top of all the news articles and the tariff talk and Liberation Day. But in actuality, companies are still doing quite well. And, maybe that won't be true come Q2 earnings, but we'll see. The other thing you want to keep in mind is SPACs. So MarketWatch calls him the SPAC king. I like to call him the SPAC monster, Chamath Palihapitiya. He gets a lot of flack from some retail investors who made some very poor decisions in the 2021 SPAC era, where he launched some SPACs. And I think people think that he rug pulled them, but I'm not sure really what happened there. But in my opinion, if you're an intelligent investor, if you're someone who's really looking into things, you're responsible for all of your investments. So if you put money into a SPAC and it didn't do well, that's on you. Chamath is probably, looking out for his own interests and doing these types of things. But my main point here is we're starting to see more talk of SPACs. Are we seeing any yet? No, but they're starting to talk about raising money for them. So that is another sign where you want to think, okay, how much money do I have in stocks and equities, these types of things, and how much do I have in cash? How much do I want to have in cash if we were to go to all-time highs in the S&P 500? I think we're at around 6,000 now. The all-time high is 6,143. So if we get into that 62 to 7,000 range and the SPAC king and IPOs are running super hot, that's probably time to start considering increasing your cash position. That's kind of where I'm at. I want to see how things play out because I think we're also in one of the greatest periods of change ever with AI, which is fueling innovation, productivity, growth, all of these things. So as much as people think we may be in a bubble, we may also be in this period where you're going to see incredible earnings growth due to AI and all the productivity from it. So anyways, my plan, if we were to get into that 6,200 to 7,000 range in the S&P 500, and again, it all depends on how things are going, I would like to get my cash position to be anywhere from 30 to 50% or more to prepare for a correction and to take advantage of that. That's kind of like my thinking. Like if we were to go super all-time highs plus super high euphoria, I would want to start increasing my cash. I'm at about 15% now. So that's just kind of, how I think about things and wanted to share that. And the final topic I wanted to go over was AI, actually, is AI. And probably the best example I could find, there's a lot of examples to be honest with you, but is AI actually profitable or is it just hype? I think it's definitely more than hype. Microsoft had a great quarter in Q1, and you can go online, find news stories, or go to their investor relations page. And probably the thing that sticks the most out to me, if you go and research this, is their Azure revenue, just from their Azure business, grew 33% year over year. And 16 of those percentage points came from growth associated with AI. Now that for a company as large as Microsoft, $3 trillion plus, that's incredible. Now, a lot of the other Mag 7 companies are experiencing that too. Meta, Amazon, NVIDIA, obviously. Tesla just released robotaxis today. They're doing rides for $4.20, just a flat fee. So they're starting to generate revenue from physical AI, along with software for AI, which is the neural networks. So I think this is another thing to keep an eye on, is comparing how high the euphoria is, how many IPOs are happening, how many SPACs are coming out versus AI profits in the biggest companies and also the small caps and the mid caps. So hopefully you find this helpful. It's really just an exercise in thinking for me, and I have fun thinking about these things and how to strategize my portfolio in terms of what percentage is in equity, what percentage is in cash or bonds, and these types of things. All right, well, have a good Sunday, and I'll see you in the next video.